In the autumn of 2020, a woman who had once been suspended from a papier-mâché moon, clad only in a fishnet body stocking, who had exchanged vows with James Bond and dispatched a monarch with poisoned wine, lay in the throes of death at her daughter's residence in London. The malignancy had permeated her entire being. While her corporeal control had waned, her sharp wit remained intact. She dictated her thoughts into a cassette recorder, a gift from her son-in-law, Guy Garvey, the frontman of the band Elbow. Closing her lips firmly, she articulated her words with the same potent delivery she had employed across 6 decades on stages and screens. Her ultimate act of rebellion was poised to be a final, heart-wrenching declaration. Yet, on the eve of her passing, she fixed her daughter Rachel with a piercing gaze and implored, "Rye, this has gone on for too long. Give me the final push." Diana Rigg was a Yorkshire force of nature, a flame that refused to be extinguished until the shocking and tragic conclusion of her remarkable life. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Enid Diana Elizabeth Rigg entered the world on the 20th of July, 1938, in Doncaster, Yorkshire. This was coal country, a region that forged individuals who possessed no tolerance for foolishness. Her father, Lewis Rigg, served as an engineer for the Indian Railways, a profession that necessitated Diana's departure on a steamship bound for Rajasthan when she was merely 2 months old. She would spend the initial 8 years of her existence in Bikaner, where her father ascended to the rank of railway executive for the Maharaja. Hindi became her second tongue. The sun blazed relentlessly, the terrain stretched endlessly, and the young English girl, with her widely set eyes, absorbed it all. Then, the war concluded, and in 1945, everything transformed. Diana's mother, Beryl Helwell, a name unmistakably rooted in Yorkshire, brought Diana and her elder brother Hugh back to a damp, rationed, and desaturated England. They established their home in Leeds. Louis would not be reunited with them until 1948. For a child accustomed to the vibrant hues, intense warmth, and peculiar grandeur of the Raj, post-war Yorkshire must have felt akin to banishment. The subcontinent had been her entire universe. She had been enveloped by servants and sunshine within the vast machinery of an empire. Now it was powdered eggs, leftover blackout curtains, and the flat vowels of the West Riding. She was dispatched to Hallam Hall Girls' School in Pocklington, a boarding institution overseen by the Moravian Church, nestled within a small community established by German Protestant missionaries in the 18th century. Rigg detested it. "I felt like a fish out of water," she would later remark. A child who had spoken Hindi and run barefoot through the dust of Rajasthan, suddenly confined to a drafty dormitory with girls who had never ventured beyond their own country. The school was austere and devout, and Diana, with her vivid recollections of the grand Indian railways and the expansive skies over Bikaner, must have appeared like an alien being. Yet, Yorkshire, she would consistently assert throughout her life, shaped her more profoundly than India ever did. Its bluntness, its refusal to be impressed, its dark humor, its bone-deep stubbornness, all originated from that place. And something else transpired at Hallam Hall. She discovered the art of acting. Rigg quickly became the school's foremost performer. When she took on the role of Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream, a pivotal moment occurred. The peculiar girl from Bikaner had found the singular arena where her distinctiveness transformed into an asset. On stage, her otherness became a form of power. She could embody any persona. By the mid-1950s, she had secured a place at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. While not the most beautiful or polished student in her cohort, there was an inherent quality to her, a volatile spark that commanded attention. In 1957, she made her professional debut at the Theatre Royal in York, participating in a touring production of Bertolt Brecht's The Caucasian Chalk Circle. It was a humble commencement. She undertook seasons in regional repertory companies, the unglamorous training ground of British theatre, in locales such as York and Chesterfield, accepting minor roles in chilly halls. However, her trajectory was decidedly upward and swift. By 1959, at the tender age of 21, Rigg had joined Peter Hall's newly formed Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford-upon-Avon. This was the Premier League. Hall was assembling a troupe destined to redefine classical theatre in Britain. The ensemble he gathered reads today like a who's who of the century's preeminent British actors, including Judi Dench, Ian Holm, Ian Richardson, and Tony Church. Rigg was a vital part of what The Guardian would later dub a brilliant core of emerging actors. She portrayed Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Bianca in The Taming of the Shrew, Cordelia opposite Paul Schofield in a shattering King Lear, and Viola in Twelfth Night, all before reaching the age of 25. She made her London debut in 1961 in Jean Giraudoux' Ondine. The critical reception was robust. The established theatrical world had taken notice. She was recognized as a serious actress with a promising future. And Peter Hall fully anticipated her remaining with the RSC, growing into an elder stateswoman playing queens, mad women, and tragic heroines. At least, that was the initial plan. Diana, however, harbored different aspirations. After 5 years immersed in Shakespeare, Brecht, and Giraudoux, she felt a growing restlessness. Although I adored being part of the company, I yearned to broaden my horizons and acquire new skills, she would later articulate. She expressed an aversion to stagnation. Consequently, she departed. Hall was incensed. He was quite dismissive when I left the company, Rigg recounted. She's going to squander her talents on television and frivolous films, he declared upon learning of my role in the Avengers. In the mid-1960s, transitioning from the realm of classical theatre to television was perceived as a demotion. In fact, several steps down, a virtual fall from grace. Rigg remained unfazed. She had auditioned for the role on a whim, without ever having viewed the program. Before delving further into Diana's explosive portrayal in The Avengers, I wish to inform you all about my other series, Hollywood Histories, which you can explore via the link displayed on screen now and in the description below. In this program, I delve into some of the more obscure and unusual facets of movie history. Most recently, I released an episode chronicling the tragic and dark love story that defined the renowned El Capitan Theatre. And this week, I examined the truly unexpected origins of the Hollywood Wax Museum. There are also episodes dedicated to the lives of the Dolly sisters, who illuminated the 1920s before a horrifying end stole them from the spotlight, and the peculiar mystery of the Hollywood detective who solved an actress's murder only to discover the perpetrator was his own father. Thank you once again. Now, let us return to Diana Rigg. The Avengers was a distinctively British creation, a spy series executed with sharp wit and an absurd sensibility, wherein Patrick Macnee's John Steed, with his bowler hat, umbrella, and impeccable manners, battled villains alongside a succession of glamorous female companions. Honor Blackman had established the initial formula. When Blackman departed for greater opportunities, having portrayed Pussy Galore in the 1964 film Goldfinger, the producers sought a replacement. Diana Rigg, at 27 years old and fresh from the RSC, was not the obvious candidate, but she entered the audition, performed a test fight sequence where she subdued a stand-in with a handbag among 15 other women, and her electrifying presence captivated the room. She was cast as Mrs. Emma Peel in 1965, and television would never quite be the same. Blackman had ignited the fuse, but Rigg would detonate the entire cache of cultural dynamite. The character's name was a rather simplistic pun, Emma Peel, or Man Appeal, though the character herself transcended this crude wordplay. Emma Peel was a widow, independently wealthy, possessed of formidable intellect, and fluent in both martial arts and sharp repartee. She was, as a contemporary critic observed, a true emblem of the era, an embodiment of the liberated, high-fashion spirit of swinging London. The leather catsuit became her defining image in the public consciousness, although Rigg herself found it a logistical nightmare. It took 45 minutes to unzip merely to use the restroom, akin to wrestling in and out of a wetsuit. Later, they transitioned to jersey catsuits, which were more accommodating, but prone to developing baggy knees, a fate Rigg considered worse than death. There were also cultural distinctions to navigate as the show gained traction on American networks. While British audiences had grown more at ease with the female form by the 60s, one particular aspect of her anatomy caused American networks to squirm. Society was far more prudish in the 1960s, she recalled. In one episode, I portrayed a belly dancer, and I had to place a jewel in my navel because the Americans wouldn't permit exposed midriffs. In those days, you certainly didn't flash your cleavage. The fight sequences also left her physically battered. I was consistently bruised by the end of most filming days, she stated. But what Emma Peel bestowed upon popular culture was more profound than fashion or fight choreography. Here was a woman who was witty and physically capable, who could match the leading man in wit and in combat. In an era when female characters on television were largely relegated to ornamental roles, Peel was truly revolutionary. The character had, in fact, initially been written for a male actor. When the previous male co-star withdrew at the last minute, his scripts were simply handed to Honor Blackman without any rewriting. This production fluke evolved into a feminist milestone. Peel inspired women's self-defense classes in both Britain and America. Decades later, the costume for Black Widow in the Marvel films would draw inspiration from that catsuit. Rigg's rapport with McNee served as the show's driving force. I knew Patrick M. somewhat vaguely, and he was kind to me, essentially guiding me through the initial episodes, she remembered. After that, we became equals, shared a mutual professional regard, and played off each other, even improvising and writing our own lines. They placed their trust in us. McNee would later confide in his son that Rigg and her driver were his only genuine friends on set, a telling detail highlighting the isolation of television stardom in the 1960s. Rigg poured herself into the role with a near-fanatical dedication. During her inaugural season, she continued to perform Shakespeare in Stratford by night, juggling her commitments to Twelfth Night with the Avengers, racing between the television studio and the theatre. Television has instilled in me an economy of style that I previously lacked, she reflected. I feel it has been nothing but beneficial. This was a generous assessment of a medium that the theatrical establishment openly disdained. The fame was immediate and overwhelming. She became instantly recognizable, a sex symbol overnight, an experience she admitted had shocked her. "It was profoundly intrusive in those days because I was instantly recognizable," she said. "I found it extremely uncomfortable." She never attended premieres. She eschewed the red carpet. "It's simply tedious having to dress up," she remarked with her characteristic Yorkshire pragmatism. Her mother, meanwhile, happily managed the considerable volume of fan mail, some of which Rigg noted with dry amusement must have given the male correspondents a considerable surprise when they received replies offering decidedly maternal advice. She deliberately maintained a low-key existence in London, striving to protect a private self that the public seemed intent on consuming. However, beneath the glamour, something more sinister was brewing. During her second season, Rigg discovered she was being paid less than the cameraman, not less than the director, but less than the individual operating the camera. She held out for a pay increase, demanding £450 per week. The media reaction was scathing. She was branded as avaricious. Not a single woman in the industry offered her support. Not her co-star, not the other actresses, no one. There was no sisterhood, she stated years later, her bitterness undiluted by time. "In those days, you were on your own." She won the battle for a fair wage, but she also made enemies, and the isolation of that struggle, waged decades before the term gender pay gap was coined, left its mark on her. "I found it preposterous that I was being paid less than a cameraman, and I wanted to shame them, and I did." She departed The Avengers after 2 seasons. She had made her point. During her tenure on The Avengers, Rigg initiated a relationship with Philip Savile, a British television director 8 years her senior, who was then separated from playwright Jane Arden. They lived together for approximately 8 years, never marrying. When the tabloids pressed her about their arrangement, Rigg was characteristically forthright. She had no desire for respectability. The relationship attracted a degree of attention that confirmed everything Rigg found objectionable about celebrity. Following her departure from The Avengers, Rigg pursued a path that the theatrical purists had never anticipated. She transitioned into film, and not just any film. In 1969, she was cast as Contessa Teresa di Vincenzo in the James Bond film On Her Majesty's Secret Service, thereby becoming the sole actress to marry 007 on screen. This was a calculated career move. "I accepted the role with the hope of gaining greater recognition in the United States," she stated. The Bond she married was George Lazenby, an Australian male model with no prior acting experience and an ego the size of Pinewood Studios. The tension between them became one of the franchise's most significant behind-the-scenes conflicts. Lazenby, I believe, thought he was a film star immediately and began to assert his authority, Rigg later remarked. The tabloids reported that Rigg had consumed garlic before their love scenes as a means of punishing him. The source of this allegation was Lazenby himself, who had begun disseminating negative tidbits about Rigg to the ravenous British tabloid press. She vehemently denied it in a public letter. "No, George, I did not intentionally eat garlic. I was not, as you claimed, guzzling champagne and some warm beer when we had the argument." The garlic story, as these things tend to do, nevertheless became embedded in Bond mythology. It was the kind of rumor that Rigg, who valued precision and fairness, found maddening. A trivial falsehood that obscured genuine grievances concerning professionalism and respect on set. The film itself, now widely acclaimed as one of the franchise's finest installments, albeit an unconventional one, provided Rigg with one of cinema's most poignant tragic conclusions. Tracy is fatally shot by Blofeld's henchwoman mere moments after their wedding. Bond cradles her body and utters, "We have all the time in the world." Rigg portrayed the role with an intelligence and emotional depth rarely afforded within the Bond series. She imbued what could have been a disposable character with genuine substance. She was a woman who matched Bond not through subservience, but through sheer force of character. Lazenby himself, years after the acrimony had subsided, acknowledged the impact she had. She undoubtedly elevated my acting performance. The early 1970s saw a surge of work on both sides of the Atlantic. There was The Hospital in 1971, a biting satire starring George C. Scott, in which Rigg convincingly embodied a seductive hippie. Following that was Theatre of Blood in 1973, a gloriously macabre horror comedy where she co-starred with Vincent Price as a Shakespearean actor who dispatches his critics using methods inspired by the plays, drowning one in a vat of mayonnaise and force-feeding another his own baked poodle pie. Rigg played the role of the devoted daughter and accomplice, frequently disguising herself in elaborate costumes. She adored Price, though she described him with affectionate accuracy as meaner than a mouse, and spoke of playing matchmaker between him and actress Coral Brown, who had confided in Rigg, "I don't desire much at this stage of my life, dear, but I do rather fancy that Vincent Price." Price and Brown subsequently married. Rigg found this outcome amusing. The film itself became a cult favorite, and Rigg's evident enjoyment of the material, the gleeful violence, and the theatrical jests underscored a facet of her temperament that the RSC purists might have been reluctant to acknowledge: a genuine affinity for the grotesque. In 1970, she made her West End debut in Abelard and Eloise, a play chronicling the tragic romance of the medieval lovers. The production necessitated a nude scene. Rigg was hesitant. "I hail from Yorkshire," she said, "and no one from Yorkshire sheds their clothes except on a Friday night." Nevertheless, she performed the scene, walking nude across the stage with Keith Michelle in a moment of shared vulnerability that was, by 1970 standards, profoundly shocking. The American critic John Simon reviewed the Broadway transfer with a remark that would haunt Rigg and ultimately inspire one of her most brilliant acts of retribution. Simon wrote that Rigg was built like a brick basilica with insufficient flying buttresses. It was a cruel and elaborately phrased commentary on the size of her bust. The remark stung, but Rigg, rather than retreating into wounded silence, filed it away. Then, in 1982, she published No Turn Unstoned, a compilation of the most damning theatrical reviews ever written, including some of her own. Simon's Basilica line was prominently featured as an object of derision. It was a masterclass in the Yorkshire art of having the final word. In 1972, she starred as Dewey in Tom Stoppard's Jumpers at the Old Vic, making her entrance languidly reclining across a crescent moon, attired in a revealing fishnet ensemble. The audience gasped. London had not witnessed anything comparable. Stoppard, who had become one of Rigg's staunchest admirers, would later recall her as someone who approached her work with sleeves rolled up and a smile for everyone. Her personal life during this period was somewhat tumultuous. In 1973, she married Israeli painter Menachem Geffen. a man she described on their wedding day with cheerful fatalism. "I have met my match. We argue constantly, but it is a marvelous, marvelous relationship." The marriage lasted approximately a year. Geffen, an artist with a fiery temperament, once hurled her luggage from a hotel window during an argument. Rigg filed for divorce, which was finalized in 1976. She accepted the dissolution with a frankness that was both disarming and melancholic. "There is no blame between us. I accept full responsibility. I suppose it is due to my dreadful independence." Throughout the mid-1970s, Rigg continued to deliver commanding performances on stage. She played Lady Macbeth opposite Anthony Hopkins in 1973, Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and a series of roles in the West End and on tour. In 1973, she crossed the Atlantic for the NBC sitcom Diana, which ran for a single season and was, by all accounts, a miscalculation. American network television seemed unsure how to handle her. She was too sharp, too dry, too distinctly English. She married again in 1982 to Archibald Sterling, a Scottish barrister and theatre producer. Their daughter Rachel had been born in 1977, 5 years prior to the wedding. Sterling was a former officer in the Scots Guards, the son of wartime commando Bill Sterling, who had been instrumental in founding the SAS. For a time, the marriage appeared successful. They cultivated a country life in Scotland, a theatrical presence in London, and raised a child who would herself become an actress. Rigg appeared in films such as Evil Under the Sun, an Agatha Christie adaptation where she was deliciously malevolent, and The Great Muppet Caper, portraying Lady Holiday with a grandeur that managed to be neither condescending to the Muppets nor the audience. She hosted PBS's Mystery, beginning in 1989, succeeding Vincent Price and introducing American viewers to British crime dramas with a raised eyebrow and a sophisticated beverage. She earned a BAFTA for the BBC miniseries Mother Love in 1989, playing a terrifyingly possessive mother with such conviction that viewers found themselves simultaneously repulsed and captivated. However, the Sterling marriage was hurtling towards its own unique disaster. In 1990, it came to light that Archie Sterling had been engaged in an affair with actress Jolie Richardson, daughter of Vanessa Redgrave, a member of one of Britain's most distinguished theatrical families. The betrayal was public and humiliating. Rigg's reaction was a theatrical performance in itself. She meticulously gathered Sterling's array of custom-made Savile Row attire and presented the entire ensemble to the nearest Oxfam charity outlet. This action, fueled by a cold, calculated rage, became a legendary tale in the annals of celebrity retribution. The opulent fabrics, expertly tailored to fit a faithless spouse, were now displayed on racks amongst pre-owned cardigans and moth-eaten overcoats. One could almost discern a distinct Yorkshire chuckle resonating from the scene. The divorce proceedings concluded, yet Rigg never remarried. She would later reflect on her role as a dedicated mother, finding solace and contentment in a rich internal world that shielded her from solitude. Rigg and Sterling eventually established a cordial co-parenting relationship. Rigg even developed a friendly rapport with Sterling's subsequent wife, but the scars ran deep. Having placed her trust twice and been wounded both times, she had drawn her own immutable conclusions. The decade of the 1990s marked what many consider the zenith of her theatrical career. In the year 1991, she assumed the central character in Euripides' Medea at the Almeida Theatre in London. The narrative chronicles a woman who, having been betrayed by her husband, enacts a horrific vengeance, culminating in the deaths of their children. It was as if this role had been specifically conceived for Rigg. She imbued it with a tightly controlled fury, a profound sense of wounded dignity that audiences found almost overwhelming. Here was an individual who intimately understood the sting of betrayal, portraying a character consumed by its very essence. The production subsequently transferred to the West End, and then, to widespread acclaim, to Broadway. In 1994, Rigg garnered the Tony Award for Best Actress in a Play at the age of 56. Years later, she would articulate the profound impact of the play with a straightforward eloquence that characterized her most insightful pronouncements. She stated that the ancient Greeks believed their destinies were predetermined by divine forces. "Forget that," she declared. "I refuse to accept that. I intend to live my life on my own terms." She elaborated, "That's why I'm drawn to women who forge ahead with purpose. They're the most compelling figures." She implored the producers to prominently display Euripides' name on the Broadway marquee. She even offered to fund this endeavor personally, but they declined, asserting it might deter potential patrons. Rigg later described this as the most gratifying moment of her professional life. Bringing a 2,500-year-old Greek tragedy to Broadway and consistently filling the theatre each night. In that same year, 1994, Rigg was honoured with the distinction of Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. She had previously been appointed a Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1988. The establishment had finally recognised her considerable achievements. This was the same young woman who had departed the Royal Shakespeare Company against Peter Hall's wishes, who had compelled a television company to compensate her fairly, who had posed nude on a London stage, and who had responded to a spiteful critic with a published work. She was now Dame Diana, and she accepted the title with her characteristic poise. Rigg was never one for affected humility, nor for dwelling on past slights. The recognition was most welcome, and the work continued unabated. Her political convictions also became more pronounced during these years. Rigg actively campaigned for peace in Vietnam, Northern Ireland, and Iraq. She was not the type of celebrity who aligned herself with causes solely for personal exposure. She simply could not remain silent when confronted with injustice. "I speak my mind, and I always have," she asserted. "If I perceive something as unfair, I will endeavour to address it." Her forthrightness earned her detractors, yet she appeared unfazed. There was an inherent obstinacy to her approach, a refusal to equivocate or dissemble, which commanded admiration, and in some circles, a degree of apprehension. Throughout the late 1990s and the early 2000s, she maintained a relentless work ethic that defied her age. In 1997, she received an Emmy Award for her portrayal of Mrs. Vanvers in a television adaptation of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, a role described as embodying chilling authority and insidious menace. She also played Lady Dedlock in Bleak House, Mrs. Bradley in the engaging The Mrs. Bradley Mysteries, and Lady Bracknell in The Importance of Being Earnest. Each performance was a subtle revelation. She never delivered a performance that felt phoned in. However, middle age presented its own challenges, which Rigg confronted directly. "I am devastated by what has happened," she once remarked regarding the aging process. "I have completely vanished. I am utterly invisible." This statement was partly jest and partly a genuine reflection for a woman who had been voted the sexiest television star of all time by TV Guide. The transition from an object of allure to a respected elder stateswoman of the acting world was profoundly disorienting. Michael Parkinson, who conducted his first interview with her in 1972, once described Rigg as the most captivating woman he had ever encountered, someone who exuded an incandescent beauty. The shift from such adoration to a perceived invisibility represented a peculiar form of loss. She navigated this transition, as she did most aspects of her life, with a dry wit. She observed, "There is a life beyond the peak of one's physical beauty, a life brimming with possibilities and joy." And with a sort of philosophical acceptance, they do say that the profession becomes increasingly demanding. Yet, my career seems to have unfolded in reverse. I am now undertaking my most significant roles as I've grown older, which is perhaps fitting, as I wasn't quite ready for them previously. She held strong opinions on a multitude of subjects and expressed them freely. Regarding feminism, she stated, "I was never anti-feminist, but I find feminists objectionable when they become aggressive and anti-men. It makes no sense to me." On the subject of viewing her own performances, she admitted, "Good heavens, I couldn't bear to watch myself. It's agonizing. You see through yourself. I know myself far too well. It's painful, and I don't do that with politicians. I think you need to know someone to truly dislike them. That said, I would gladly toss most politicians into a cauldron and boil them alive." She never imposed censorship upon herself, nor did she soften her edges for public consumption. This, as she readily acknowledged, was the Yorkshire spirit within her. "I hope there's a hint of scandal about me," she once commented. "Hopefully, there's one good scandal left in me yet." In the year 2013, at the age of 74, a remarkable event occurred. She was cast as Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, in HBO's Game of Thrones. The role was a perfect fit. She portrayed a shrewd matriarch who wielded her wit like a weapon, who schemed and manipulated, and who delivered cutting remarks with a smile that could curdle milk. Co-creator David Benioff later explained the casting with elegant simplicity. "Dames don't audition for you, you audition for them," he said. "We had tea with her. She was witty. She was formidable. She was everything we envisioned for that character." Rigg had never watched Game of Thrones prior to being cast, nor did she watch it afterwards. "Much like the Avengers," she remarked, "I had absolutely no awareness of its global impact." She didn't need to watch it. She inherently understood the demands of the role. On her inaugural day, she was presented with an exceptionally lengthy monologue detailing the provisions required for a marching army: sheep, cattle, soldiers, and so forth. Upon reading it, she immediately recognized it as a test. She thought, "These people are testing an aging actress to see if she can memorize it." She resolved, "I'm going to deliver it in one take." And she did. On set, she was both magnificent and intimidating in equal measure. Director Mark Mylod admitted to being intimidated by her. During his very first scene with Rigg, he proposed a minor adjustment in staging, closing a door and walking a few steps. She firmly dismissed his suggestion, offered her own interpretation, and then stated, "Thank you. You may leave." Mylod retreated to his monitor, feeling stripped of any dignity or authority, as he described it. While filming a scene where Olenna instructs the sand snakes to cease their chatter, actress Jessica Henwick recounted that Rigg was so displeased with the line that she effectively stormed off the set. although at her age this was accomplished at a leisurely pace. "She made me laugh hysterically," Henwick recalled. "I adored her." Olenna Tyrell's final scene, poisoned by Jaime Lannister, drinking the wine in a single deliberate gulp, then confessing to Joffrey's murder so that Cersei would know the perpetrator, showcased Rigg at her absolute finest. D.B. Weiss remarked, "Even though you leave the scene knowing she is moments from death, you still feel as though she emerged victorious. She is likely the only character to have triumphed in her own death scene." Game of Thrones earned Rigg 4 Emmy nominations for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Drama Series across her 5 seasons on the show. She appeared in 18 episodes. More significantly, it introduced her to a new generation of admirers, millions of people who had never seen The Avengers or On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and who discovered in the sharp-witted elderly woman a spirit that was fierce, liberated, and vibrantly alive. Olenna, in many respects, embodied Diana herself, or at least the public persona of Diana, the one who expressed her thoughts candidly and dared anyone to take offense. "She was an old bag," Rigg said of the character with a laugh. "Right up my alley." She was thoroughly delighted by the entire experience. "I am truly grateful for Game of Thrones," she said. "It's a wonderful thing to happen to an actress of my age. I couldn't have asked for better dialogue. I'm so fortunate. I could be sitting at home, withering away, but I'm not." In 2013, she also appeared alongside her daughter, Rachel, in a Doctor Who episode titled The Crimson Horror, which was specifically written for them by Mark Gatiss. It marked the first occasion mother and daughter had collaborated professionally, and the episode allowed Rigg to utilize her native Doncaster accent for the first time in her career. The role of Mrs. Gilliflower, a Victorian villainess, was pure camp, and Rigg relished every syllable. She never ceased her work. In 2018, at the age of 80, she returned to Broadway in the Lincoln Center revival of My Fair Lady, portraying Mrs. Higgins. She received another Tony nomination. Her career was bookended by the same prestigious award, spanning nearly 25 years between her initial win and this final acknowledgement. She took a role in Edgar Wright's psychological horror film Last Night in Soho, filmed in early 2020. She continued to work, as she always had, right up until the very end. "Working keeps me young," she had once stated. This was not mere rhetoric, it was a survival strategy. Rigg had been a smoker since the age of 18, a habit of a pack a day for decades, consumed with an intensity reminiscent of a particular generation of British actors who treated smoking as part of their craft. By 2017, her health had begun to deteriorate. She underwent cardiac ablation surgery. During the procedure, her heart stopped. She nearly died on the operating table. Upon her recovery, she humorously remarked to a journalist in her distinctive manner, "The good Lord must have said, 'Send the old bag back down.' I'm not ready for her yet." She finally quit smoking after the surgery, but the cumulative damage over half a century had taken its toll. In March 2020, as the world began to implement lockdowns due to COVID-19, Diana Rigg received a diagnosis of terminal lung cancer. The disease had spread extensively, and she was given 6 months to live. She moved into her daughter Rachel's home in London. Rachel's husband, Guy Garvey, had experience with recording individuals nearing the end of their lives. He had previously taped his own father speaking before his passing, and it seemed a natural course of action for Diana. Her bed was arranged in a room adorned with her favourite photographs and cherished comforts. A radio by her bedside and bottles of Narcisse perfume sprayed liberally. She had made her own recordings before her passing. Initially, she wished to document her recollections of the Royal Shakespeare Company, those early days in Stratford. However, as her prognosis became definitive, her focus shifted. She desired to speak about the process of dying. She wanted to discuss the legal implications. She sought one final opportunity to voice her convictions. On the cassette tapes, her voice remains unmistakably hers, that crisp, agile instrument that had so effectively served the works of Shakespeare, Stoppard and Bond. "I have cancer, and it is pervasive. I have been given 6 months to live, and I am not afraid to describe the least pleasant aspects of my condition. The reality is that I have lost control of my bowels. To me, this is the most dehumanizing experience imaginable." She recounted mornings spent with Rachel in the bathroom, a mixture of laughter and tears, showering together, describing it as an act of profound love and kindness, yet lamenting that it shouldn't be necessary. She spoke of patients who intentionally starve themselves to death due to a lack of alternative means of control. She advocated for a change in legislation to grant individuals genuine autonomy over their own bodies at the conclusion of life. She had explored every possibility, including the Dignitas clinic in Switzerland, which proved to be logistically unfeasible given the limited time frame. She considered the notion of renting a swanky house and engaging a dodgy doctor. She and Rachel had discussed every potential scenario. They had shared moments of uproarious laughter, for that was the Rigg woman's way. However, the ultimate conclusion was somber. In her own words, "It is impossible to depart this life without it being plainly barbaric or excruciatingly inefficient." The recordings commenced with the poignant declaration, "Fair is fair, Rachie. I've always spoken out." This was her final testament, her ultimate struggle, waged from a bed in her daughter's home with the same ferocity she had brought to every prior confrontation. The day before she passed, she confided in Rachel, "I think I've rather let my guard down. I think he's mean." Dame Diana Rigg died at her residence on the 10th of September 2020. Her daughter stated that she had spent her final months joyfully reminiscing about her extraordinary life and that she would miss her immeasurably. It took Rachel Sterling 3 years to listen to the tapes. When she finally did, she published her mother's words in The Observer in December 2023. She had promised Diana she would share them. The recordings reignited the national discourse on assisted dying in Britain, precisely as Rigg had intended. Even from beyond the grave, she was making a significant statement about a matter of importance. Her final screen appearances were released posthumously. Black Narcissus, the BBC miniseries, aired in late 2020. Last Night in Soho premiered in cinemas in 2021, dedicated to her memory. She remains present on screen in the concluding moments of a distinguished career, alert and commanding, her Yorkshire fire undiminished. Director Jonathan Kent perhaps best encapsulated her essence, stating, "Her unique blend of force of personality, beauty, courage, and sheer emotional power made her a great classical actress." Tom Stoppard described her talent as luminous. She was indeed both of those things, but she was also, and above all, what Stoppard aptly named her in his tribute, a trooper with a capital T. With her, everyone was accounted for, and heaven help anyone foolish enough to impede her progress. That concludes this episode. Share your memories of Diana Rigg in the comments section below. Was it as a Bond girl, a classical actress, or from her role in the Avengers? Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to visit the Hollywood Mystery Store, linked in the description, to browse our exclusive range of t-shirts. I've been Ava. Thanks for listening, and until our next broadcast, sweet dreams.